Hi, this is Zach with Worn&Wound, and today I'll be taking a look at the Hamilton Crosswind Auto Chronograph. This is a really interesting watch from Hamilton that is both unique in their line and I think actually unique in the marketplace. It's a very specialized watch that has a function that I don't know if any other watch has, certainly not a common function, which is a drift angle calculator for pilots. Like I said, this is very specialized. This isn't something that you can or would use normally when walking around or anything like that. It's really an instrument for pilots. But what's cool is that how they implement it and that they could implement it in a watch using a series of bezels. So there's actually 3 bezels on this watch. 2 internal, as you can see from the crowns on the right side, and an external bezel. So it's really, a watch about being complex and about, the art of flying and all these other kind of interesting things. Though, as just a watch for you for walking around, it's really just a nice, big, beefy, modern-looking pilot chronograph, and a destro one at that, which is something you don't see very often. So the crown and the pushers are on the left side. Apart from being this really complex thing, like I said, it's interesting looking at this nice kind of panda arrangement. It is also a very fairly priced watch for a new, modern automatic Swiss chronograph that is available at retail. So the MSRP on this watch is $1,595, meaning you'll likely find it for a little bit less than that at an authorized dealer. So it's actually a really, it is a great value for a Swiss-made automatic chronograph. And one really cool feature about it, and why you might be seeing this more often now, is that it is being featured on the wrist of one of the actors in the film Independence Day Resurgence, which is coming out this summer. So yeah, let's take a closer look. The Crosswind is a big watch in the tradition of pilots' watches, but also with the addition of the Crosswind calculator bezels, you can see why they need the extra space. So it measures 44 millimeters in diameter, 54 millimeters lug to lug, and 15.5 millimeters tall. So it's a big, beefy watch. It's certainly a large watch, no way around that. But as you can see from proportions, the inner dial here is actually fairly small, and then that internal bezel is wide, and then even another external bezel. So you can just see where that size came from. Apart from that, it's a very attractive case. I like it. It's a modern take on the pilot watch, and it has some nice style points to it. So looking from the top, you have a kind of a classic design in terms of the mid case, just long contouring lugs, brushed finish all around, and then a plethora of buttons and pushers. And I think that's really the aesthetic of this watch. Like you need to like that complexity, the dual crown, the chronograph, and I think it's cool looking. It makes it very rugged, makes it very instrument looking. So obviously on the right side, you have 2 crowns for adjusting the internal bezels. They're both screwed down. They're massive. They have crown guards, both of them. So they definitely are very noticeable when you unscrew them, which we'll show you later how they adjust those. On the left side then, you have the timed crown, also guarded by crown guards, and 2 square pushers. I really like the look of these square pushers here, and I'm glad that they went with that over a kind of a classic pusher. It's a little bit different. It contrasts with the roundness of these large crowns here. I think it looks good. And when you're using the chronograph, since it's destro, you push on the lower one here. Feels good against your thumb. So I think that was actually a very smart choice. And aesthetically, it's stylish. And the fact that those are polished against the brushed case, just a very nice, good decision. The external bezel here then, which actually indicates airspeed, or rather your airspeed, you'd set it to yours at 1/10. Has a very complex look. There's a lot of markings, a lot of lines, little teeth around. It does rotate. It's non-ratcheting, bidirectional, because it's not for elapsed time. It's just about setting that one number. Looking at it now from the side, on the right side, you can get a better look at these 2 crowns. Massive crowns, big H logo, polished, big blocky guards on there. No messing around with those. They're very protected. They're very strong. I like that they made this thing very solid. Looking at the opposite side now, once again, you just get a better look at those pushers in that crown. The square pushers, I like the design of these, like I said. I like that they are just strictly squares. I think it's cool looking. It's a little different from your typical pusher design. Even the kind of more oblong pushers, they don't tend to be that kind of chunky square. Flipping the watch over now, you have a very cool looking case back. This is definitely a unique design that mixes both a display case back and a solid case back with obviously a very technical drawing on here. This has to do, once again, with calculating your drift angle. I believe once you do all the calculations, this is something where you'd kind of like you find the point on this grid and where you're, I'm not even going to go into it. It's very complicated. Nevertheless, I really like that it's there. It's just cool looking, and I like the shape of this window here, which perfectly kind of matches the rotor when you have it sitting like this. It's not a perfect arc. It has a little notch in there, so that's just cool. And then if you want to and you turn it around, you can see the H21 automatic chronograph movement in there a little bit better. Looking at the dial of the Crosswind, you have a lot going on, but it's broken up into different tiers to kind of separate the information out. So you have this lower, smaller dial, which is your time and chronograph dial, and that's actually quite simple and clear, which makes it a very legible watch at the end of the day. So it's matte black surface, and then on which you have a primary index of applied stainless steel markers, brushed. They have a very nice look. I really like the texture of the brushing there, a little bit different. Obviously, they skip 12, 3, 6, and 9 for the subdials and the day date. Everything is balanced, though, because of that. I think the placement and everything is really nice, so none of the numbers are cut off. The subdials just rest against these little lume dots that go around. Everything's really balanced, which is always good to see. Speaking of the lume dots, you have this smaller outer index of the lume dots. I really like their three-dimensional dots. They look like almost like applied tritium. Gives a little bit of a vintage feel. I think that's a very nice touch. And then you have white lines in between them for the individual minute and chronograph seconds. So everything you'd expect to find on kind of a simple classic pilot's chronograph. Looking now at the subdials, at 12 and 6, you have the chronograph subdials. So this movement here, the H21, is based on the Valjoux 7750. So you're going to find pretty much everything you'd expect to find on that watch. On that movement here, obviously it's been inverted, so for the destro. But what's really cool about the H21 is that actually it's a 60-hour power reserve. So that's up from the around 42 hours of the 7750. That's just always good to have more power. Take the watch off, it'll last longer off your wrist. Now just getting back into these subdials. Silver subdials for the chronograph function. I think that's a really nice touch. Gives the watch an inverse panda look, a little bit of a classic look, something vintage about it. They're very attractive subdials. They have circular graining. There's a little bit of a lower area with numerals on it than a raised area with an index. Then the active seconds is the same thing in black, has a lower area with circular graining and a raised area, but it's a lot less, has a lot less visual weight because it is not contrasting as much. So the focus really is on these two subdials. The day date at 9, black on white day disc. That's once again high contrast. Be interesting to see what that looked like if it was white on black, but that actually could have created kind of a gap there. So this might actually be better balanced to have that contrast. Looking now at the hands, you have Roman sword hands for the hour minute. You'll see these on other Hamilton khaki watches, and this watch is part of that series, and I think it definitely feels like a Hamilton khaki watch in a good way. They're very clear. They have a little bit of a vintage feel from that elongated needle tip. Seconds hand is then a thin seconds with a lume little triangle at the end. All the subdials also have kind of similar Roman sword hand. I really like these little miniature Roman sword hands. They even have lume in them. Very often subdials just have little stick hands. They're a lot less significant. I think that I like that Hamilton kind of went a little further with these. So getting into the 3 bezels here for calculating crosswind. It's very complicated. This is really pilot speak. This is beyond my understanding very quickly. It's not like a slide rule calculator, which has day-to-day applications. It's really a specific thing. It involves magnetic bearings. It involves control towers. It's really a pilot's tool. But just to quickly show you like how you might use it, how these bezels work. So the lower crown here controls this first internal bezel, which is the kind of top internal bezel. What you would do is you would set this, to the origin point, let's say. Then you have a little window within that bezel, which is currently at 12. It might be a little bit hard to see. In there you have another bezel, which is controlled by the top crown, and that actually has red text on white, which is nice looking, and that's just a 360-degree bezel. So what you would do is, after calling your control tower and getting the wind direction, is that you would set the wind direction in there, so in degrees. So you would, you would just turn that to whatever. The external bezel is then your speed represented at 1/10, so you would set that to your speed. The rest of it is a bunch of complicated math that I am not going to even bother trying to get into because I do not understand it. But that's the general gist. They're very attractive. They have a very complicated look. Obviously not useful day-to-day function, but if you are a pilot and you're very analog, maybe this thing is something that you'd be able to use quite regularly. On the wrist, the Hamilton Crosswind Auto Chronograph, like I said, it's a big watch. It's a bold watch, chunky watch with big crowns. It's definitely a statement piece. It's definitely a piece for a larger wrist. On a 7-inch wrist, I mean, it's not outlandish. It's definitely bigger than I might, prefer. But it also, I've definitely worn watches that had similar dimensions that felt much bigger. I think part of that is because the lugs curl down a lot, so they follow the wrist, so it's not just like a plain over. And the proportions here, when you have more bezel and the dial gets smaller, the whole thing kind of pulls in and looks a little bit smaller. So it's a big watch, but it doesn't look nearly as big as I think you think it's going to, or when it's sitting on a table. And then, it happens to be a very attractive watch. It's very technical looking. It's aggressive, but it's not loud. I think it has a classicalness to it. Definitely speaks to classical pilot watches. Speaks to the khaki military watches. The mix of black and silver here, very kind of a classic combination. I love all the crowns and pushers. I am a bit of a sucker for that kind of thing. I really like dual crown divers. I really like chronographs. So, you have both here kind of. So it's a cool look. And I think the little bit of texture you get then from the smaller dial in there with the brushed markers and these steel, the contrast subdials is really nice, especially as you catch the light and you get the kind of glints of silver off them. It's a very attractive, very handsome, kind of stoic looking watch, modern, but not overtly either. It has 22 millimeter lugs and it comes on this tan riveted pilot strap. Definitely a classic look, one that kind of brings out some of perhaps the military and pilot heritage of it. It's a very thick leather strap. It's very thick. It's about 6 millimeters thick, I'd say, around the lug. Then it thins out a little bit. It's straight cut, has this nice tan color, twin rivets on both sides. It features one of Hamilton's kind of signature H-tang buckles. So you have the 2 prong holes here, which is an interesting look. I mean, it definitely just makes it feel more Hamilton when you take it off and you have the little H buckle there, which is cool. I mean, it's a nice strap. You might have heard it's a little squeaky when it's off your wrist, but that doesn't really affect anything when you're walking around or wearing it, and I'm sure that would go away with a little bit more of a break-in period. To wrap up, the Hamilton Crosswind Automatic Chronograph is a very interesting watch. It's an intriguing watch, and I think it's very cool that Hamilton makes it because it is so specialized and has such a specific function. And one that, frankly, isn't a day-to-day function. It's not something that's going to bring you utility when you're walking around. But it speaks to a story, and the story of pilot watches, crosswinds, drift angles, instrumentation, and all these other things that a lot of pilot watches and aviation watches really kind of play at, but they just mimic, right? You have a watch that looks like an altimeter, a watch that looks like XYZ. This thing actually is a tool. Might not be a tool you use, but it is a tool. And I think that's very cool, and I think a lot of people will appreciate that. And especially because the aesthetic of it isn't really that crazy, isn't that wild? It's just a nice looking, big, modern pilot watch with hints of vintage. Very wearable, nice looking, cool movement in there too. H21, like I said, 60-hour, value 7750. Certainly no complaints there. And then the price tag is really great. $1,595 for a modern, newly released, automatic chronograph from a Swiss-made brand is very good. It's very good. You're not going to find many that are lower than that. And because that's the MSRP, you're likely to even pay a little bit less from NAD. No guarantees on that, though, but that's just a general rule. This is a great watch. Keep an eye out for it in Independence Day Resurgence. Read the full review on Worn&Wound. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Thank you.